Over the last few weeks, I've received a lot of comments like this, both in my videos and in my DMs.
I want to share my thoughts on this because as a mom of 3 boys, this kind of struck a chord with me. And I have gone back and tried to watch as many of the videos and read some of the comments, but I'm definitely probably going to repeat something that someone has already shared. But it did hit me because it's complicated. This whole conversation is obviously complicated. So what I absolutely agree with is that it is a parent's responsibility to have these conversations with our boys. So my oldest is 5. Those conversations right now are very high level. He's not ready to know kind of the depths of it all. But we're going to start that conversation. We're going to get into that conversation. Absolutely we are. But I think about some of the comments I was reading, and we have one mom saying her teen boy is sensitive and is having a hard time understanding why this is, that he's being labeled, or that his demographic or he's being labeled. And even if, I think I read in the comments that mother is trying to educate, but that's hard because that is a sensitive child, obviously. And they're allowed to be empathetic and sensitive and find that really hard to take. And then there's other people in the comments saying, I educated my kid and he gets it and he's he's going to fix it. And I've given him the stats and he's on board. And that's also great because there are going to be kids who aren't as sensitive and aren't as, they don't take it all as personally. They can just see the bigger picture. And I'm struggling with my words and how to put this into words, but I look at my 5-year-old and he's a very sensitive little guy. And I can't say for sure how he's going to grow up, but as his mom, I have a pretty good idea that he's going to be that sensitive, empathetic one. He takes, even the things we're talking about now, he's already asking questions that I can tell he's kind of internalizing it. And I have to be careful how I explain things, and I'm keeping it age appropriate, but I have to already be careful how I'm explaining things so that I don't increase his anxiety about it. So fast forward, I can only imagine with these different young boys that the exact same conversation from the exact, 2 different sets of parents, but having the exact same conversation with 2 teen boys, some of them are going to just be ready to jump in and be part of the change, and others are going to actually find that harder to get past and to figure out for themselves. And it doesn't mean that they're resistant to it, and it might mean that they're resistant to it. That's another thing. So I'm getting there. But we're all different people. And even as a woman, as a cisgendered female, my experience growing up, I was really lucky to be surrounded by men who didn't make me feel lesser than for being a woman. I just didn't have that experience. And I'm really lucky for that. And then because of my level of empathy or my level of sensitivity, even when I did encounter men who made me feel a certain way, my experience of that might be different than another woman's. And then we have people with other gender identities and they're experiencing too. So I absolutely agree that all kids, no matter what their gender identity, no matter who they are, they all need to be educated on the situation. Absolutely. And we have to also appreciate that every single one of these kids, just like every single one of us adults, are going to take that information differently. It's going to be harder for some to move past some kind of guilt that doesn't even necessarily need to be their guilt, but that's how they internalize things. I internalize guilt for people that have nothing to do with me or my demographic. And there are people who are going to have varying levels of that. And I absolutely agree that the answer here is wherever we can to approach conversations with empathy. I'm not saying to let people off the hook. I'm not saying to let kids or boys off the hook. But approaching everyone with empathy or with the benefit of the doubt in the beginning of the conversation, I saw the stitch with the teacher to bring them into that conversation in a way that doesn't other them in before they've even done anything wrong is important. I'm going to go all over the place here because I have a few thoughts. My other thought around this is I agree. It is a parent's responsibility to have these conversations with their kid. I agree that primarily in an ideal world, that's what would be what's happening. However, I don't agree with any kind of view where people say, it's not my problem. Don't put that labor on me. And again, for an individual who can't take that on, fine. But I agree with Frank in that as a collective, as a community, any of us who can take on that labor, any of us who can take on that empathetic, bringing them into the conversation labor, should be doing it. Because that's fantastic that me and you and someone else might be having these conversations with our boys as they're growing up. But what about all the boys and all the kids, for that matter, of every gender identity whose parents aren't going to have those conversations? Because we know that there are tons of parents out there that don't see things the way we do, that aren't going to have that conversation with their kids. And are we supposed to just say, well, so what for those boys? Let's just let whatever happens happen? Leave it just to the teachers to try to maintain that? Like, that conversation, that empathy, that bringing them in, as a community, we can do that. We can help with that movement to get them to be powers for social change. We have to bring them in and show them that we believe in them so that they can be part of the change, so that they can help move this world forward in a better direction. But if we're only focusing on our own kids, then what about all those other kids? Who's going to help them? And then by the time it's too late, right? Like, this is bigger than just each person and their kid. This is a collective. And even if it was each person and their kid. So I'm lucky that, like, my husband is on board and we are going to have these conversations with our kids. But this idea that, like, it's your job then, and I agree, like, so it's the emotional labor of only that mother and that father to have to do this with their kids. That's also putting labor on those parents and those women or those people who identify as, it doesn't have to be, because the dads are too, like the dads that are going to do the work. But why should it just be, just like those of us who have boys, it is our responsibility to make sure our boys grow up understanding what the girls are going to be going through, or those that have other gender identities are going through. I think it works in the reverse. Like, if you're a parent of girls, it doesn't mean that lets you off the hook for thinking about these other kids, because that we don't move society forward when it's like not my problem. And bringing boys in, bringing kids in, bringing teenagers in, I'm going to even argue bringing other adults in. When someone is willing to hear, why would we not want them to feel cared for, to feel important, to feel like they also matter in the conversation? Because they do. They matter too. Just because historically their demographic is the problem doesn't mean that they are the problem. They might be, some of them might be, and that is a different conversation. But I still think starting from empathy every single time is the right move. Holding them accountable, absolutely, also yes. Not letting them off the hook, absolutely, of course, yes. But starting from empathy is the answer, and everyone should be doing it as much as they can. And you're allowed to be angry, and you're allowed to have a moment, and you're allowed to be frustrated. But at the end of the day, if as a community we are all moving that conversation forward, and we are all working to try to help these kids see the reality and be part of the change as part of the group. I think of the magical feedback phrase, if you're familiar with it. Leadership training and feedback and communication is part of my job. And I think about this magical feedback phrase that we talk about at work. And it's that I have very high expectations and I know you can reach them. And it is that to me. To me, that is the conversation with these boys. This is a really big problem, and I know you can be part of the solution. Not, you are the problem, so you need to fix it. This is a problem, and it's not currently your fault, but it absolutely is your responsibility to become part of the solution. But, like, help parents do that, because how else are we going to get there?